There we go. All right, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Sarah Sarelson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Children's Trust Fund to Prevent Child Abuse Wyoming. It's wonderful to be here with all of you on this little bit gloomy morning, but I think it's going to be a hot day here in Cheyenne. I want to take just a moment and give credit where credit is absolutely due. This project has been happening for quite a while, and over the last more than a year now that we've been working on this implementation, I want to just call out a few people and give them some gratitude. So Jason Mincer from Enroll Wyoming, Sabrina Lane from Wyoming 211, Nicole Nieder from the Children's Trust Fund, Gail Marks from Department of Family Services, Sheila Riceley from the Align team, Josh Hannes from the Wyoming Primary Care Association, and Jen Davis from the Governor's Office, who has been in the background doing a ton of work around how do we implement family resource centers in Wyoming. So thank you to that incredible team that have been part of this and supporting us along the way. So let's start with a poll and see, where are you in Wyoming? So we have lots of us that are tuning in, and we'll see where we have covered across the state. Give you just a moment. About half the people on have answered where you are in Wyoming. So I understand it's very early this morning, so we'll give you just another second. We have someone now from everywhere, so that's exciting. All right, we'll go ahead and end this poll, and I will show you. All right, so we have the least amount of people from southwestern Wyoming and the most amount of people from southeastern Wyoming. So thanks so much for playing along this morning. All right, the things that we're going to cover, we're going to talk a little bit about project goals, not as much as the previous webinar. There was a webinar on July 10th that is available on our website and was emailed out. So if there are pieces that you're missing from the previous webinar, we want to make sure that you have that information. Today, we know everyone is here to learn about the letter of interest. We want to talk about what the grant phases are going to look like, and then next steps. Feel free to stop me at any time, ask questions, and there'll also be a time at the end for questions. All right, so on this journey, the Children's Trust Fund and the Children's Trust Fund Alliance across the nation has been talking about family resource centers for a very long time. There is a lot of research that has happened and a lot of evidence to support that when we collaborate better in communities and have central hubs for families to go to, that there are better outcomes in a variety of different areas. With that information, the Governor's Health Task Force then started meeting during COVID, and lots of discussions were happening about what kinds of things can we do as a state to be better serving, more responsive to the families and Wyomingites, so that we can make sure that people have what they need. And that was really heightened during the pandemic. From the Governor's Health Task Force, there were many different subcommittees, and most of them were talking about some kind of hub that families could go to, this one-stop shop, this coordinated way for providers to be able to work better together. And from that came a recommendation for family resource centers to be implemented in Wyoming. After the initial request for ARPA funding was denied, there was a group of stakeholders, about 30 of us, that got together talking about what would it take to implement family resource centers in Wyoming with the available funding that we already knew we had. And so there was some work on implementing and coordinating and how that would be. And then in the 2023 legislative session, we were delighted by the legislature providing some funding to family resource centers in their ARPA bill. Some questions about where exactly is all of this money coming from. And so you'll see here we have funds that we're using from the Preschool Development Grant, from the Family Resource Center ARPA bill, and then the Child Care ARPA funds from Department of Family Services are also designated to support this project. There was a specific question about the ARPA funding and which organization or agency it had been appropriated to. So I went ahead and I pulled out that language so that we could provide that information to you. If you watched the last webinar or you were on with us, we talked about that it was the Department of Family Services, and the specific language was for the purpose of developing a program to provide grants, collect and monitor data, and provide technical assistance to communities to establish or strengthen family resource centers. So I wanted to make sure that you had that information. All right, so let's jump into what is a family resource center in Wyoming. We're talking about collaborative, community-based places. So this is individualized, family-centered, and they provide this on-site targeted program or services or resources or activities. Some of them will provide classes to strengthen families and our Wyoming communities. It's these welcome hubs that we've talked about year after year, and they desire to support services and opportunities to create healthy, strong, and successful families and communities. So this is a very long way to say we're going to serve families as families need to be served in a better coordinated way. We've talked for years and years about how can we collaborate better, what would this look like, and there's a lot of work that has been happening for many years now in these efforts, and some incredible things that are already happening in communities that we want to continue to partner with and support. Specifically, the project has two primary goals. So we're going to create a statewide network. So we're calling this the Wyoming Family Resource Center Collective. So this is the collaborative piece, where the focus will be to provide technical assistance and best practices for communities. If you were on the previous webinar, we had an opportunity to poll you and ask you what kinds of things were you most interested in. And a lot of the response was in training, in best practice, in evidence-based practices. And those pieces we want to be able to support statewide network. And then to provide grants to individual communities to help establish or strengthen family resource centers. As I started in the beginning with the collaborative nature of this, I also want to call out a few different organizations that are helping specifically with the Family Resource Center Collective. So we have the Children's Trust Fund, we have Wyoming 211, we have the Community Service Network of Wyoming, and the National Family Support Network, all holding a piece of training and technical assistance to be able to reach all of us across the state in a more coordinated way. Instead of asking multiple places for individual technical assistance, you'll be able to come to one technical assistance spot and be able to get your individualized needs, whether that's for your staff or for the families that you work with. I want to pause here and just introduce a couple folks who are on with us today. So first I want to introduce Amy Zeke. Amy is the project consultant on this program and is going to be providing a lot of the initial technical assistance for this project. So when we talk later about the letter of interest, Amy is the person that you'll go to with questions, and we'll make sure that you have all of her contact information. But because there are so many moving pieces and parts and people, I want to make sure that you know who to talk to when there are specific questions, or if you reach out to me, who it is that I will be connecting you with so that we can make sure to get you the information that you need as quickly as possible. Amy also is in the finalized steps of the environmental scan that has been drafted for this project, and we will soon have that available for all of you to be able to read and utilize in your communities. But I just wanted to go ahead and introduce Amy and welcome her to this Family Resource Center project. You scroll all the way down to be able to get to her name, but Amy is here and she's available to help. The other person that I want to make sure that I introduce and provide a connection with is Nicole Nieder from the Wyoming Children's Trust Fund. So Nicole will oversee the fiscal and financial support and the contracts. So the contracts through this project will come from the Wyoming the Wyoming Children's Trust Fund. And Nicole will help with that paperwork. We'll make sure that all the pieces are in place. We'll assist with getting vendors into the Wolf's system if that is needed, all of those pieces. So two folks initially that if you are asking questions about the letter of interest, that goes to Amy. If you're asking questions about the contracts, the fiscal pieces of it, that will go to Nicole Nieder. And so I want to make sure that we provide you that information. Of course, we will help you, all of us. If you reach out and have questions and we aren't really sure where to get them, we will get you to the right place. So feel free to contact me with any additional questions. But thank you to Amy and to Nicole for your support of this project as we move forward. All right, so one of the things that we have been doing is we have been looking at a variety of Wyoming County data. I want to give you this link, and then I'm also going to pull it over. Oh, here we go. So that you can see the full piece on here. All right. So what this shows you, and you should now have access to it as well, and we'll have a copy of it on our website as we're looking at data more across the state, having ways that we can share this information and to just be better about what kind of data are we using and what is it telling us. So you'll see that we have for every county, there are data points, and then down below are the definitions of where this information came from, how these formulas were created, and ways for you to go out and get additional data on it. So if we start looking at Albany County, we see a total population, the child population. When we look at access, this is based on a survey that was completed from the Department of Health, and they went out and asked folks in different areas how hard it was to access services. And this rate is based on how many said there were 5 or more of these areas that were difficult. And so when we're talking about coordinating services, we're trying to take input from those who are living in the area to be able to determine what kinds of gaps are there. You'll also see at the very bottom that there is the Wyoming number statewide. So it gives us some comparison to be able to say that this number is in line with the rest of Wyoming, or perhaps this is a strength, or even an area that is more of a challenge. So when we look at areas like licensed childcare capacity, we looked at how many licensed childcare spots are there in that county. When we compare it to how many children are in the county. And so being able to look at the rates for some of our very small areas and our very large areas when we're talking about how many children may ultimately need childcare spots compared to how many are available. And you'll see when we're talking about childcare capacity and this is no surprise to anyone on here, that we're really talking about a very little capacity compared to the number of children who may need a childcare spot. Then we look at our poverty levels, our substantiated child maltreatment rate, which was calculated similarly. So we looked at the number of children who were substantiated for child abuse in that county compared to how many children were in the county to be able to help us determine in those specific areas and look at big towns, small towns, and very tiny towns. And then we look at employment rates, which all across Wyoming are very, very low, and then our food insecurity rates. And I think somebody just hopped off of mute. Is that true? Okay, no. All right, so you have access to this chart, and we'll continue to share information with you as we move forward. One of the components of this project is using data to inform our decisions. And so one of the things that we are providing technical assistance in is to assist with some of that data collection in areas where you're not already doing that. There are areas that are doing that already, and we, of course, want to support whatever it is that you have already that's going on. So we'll keep moving. If you weren't able to do any of the other ways, you can scan this QR code and get that document as well. So give me just a second. Okay, so we're talking today about the letter of interest. We're asking that if you have an interest in either the technical assistance or in grant funding for your community, that you let us know by September 15th. If you are in a period of your month where you may not meet until after September 15th as a county meeting or prevention coalition or whatever it might look like, just let us know. There's flexibility in the dates that we're going to give you. But I just want to make sure that we get them started as quickly as possible. And you'll see why when we talk about what kinds of timeframes that we're looking for in these initial funding streams that need to be spent. So you'll complete the letter of interest. It's a Google form. We'll go through it today. It's very simple. And then we will connect you with Amy Zeke to be able to do some technical assistance to help your community complete the application based on some different grant funding phases, wherever it is that your community already is. If your community has a family resource center or a very strong prevention coalition that already has many of these components in place, it may be that you're starting in a later phase of this compared to areas who are just starting out and maybe don't have those pieces already established or are restarting following the pandemic, if there were things that were very strong before, but maybe don't have the strength that they had before at this time. So that will be the process of how the applications will be done so that we can provide you with the technical assistance that you need in completing the application. One of the things that we heard across the state is that the application process can be pretty overwhelming and asks for a lot of different documents and a lot of different pieces that take a lot of time. And we know that you already have more to do than time in the day. And that's why we are going to work with Amy to be able to help get some of those documents or find some of that specific county data that is needed for these pieces so that you have that support of somebody that can help you to do those things. If you have someone that is very strong in grant writing in your community or in your organization, and that's something that you have capacity to do, you, of course, are going to be encouraged to do so. But we want to make sure that everybody in every community has the opportunity to be part of this, no matter where you are in that spectrum of having a robust grant writing team that it works for you, to most of us who are working on a very small group of staff and very small available time. So we'll want to make sure to do that support in response to what it was that you asked for. All right, so every application has to have the following criteria. So it's a public or private organization. You have to be located in Wyoming. These are Wyoming funds for Wyoming people and organizations. You have to be eligible for federal funding, and you have to be a family serving organization in one of these areas. So it's childcare, referral, and assistance, early childhood education, elementary and or middle school or high school education, parent education, economic assistance, concrete supports in times of need. So this would include our food banks or diaper banks. I've seen some formula banks popping up. So those are those concrete supports that we are giving to families, and then healthcare assistance. So we're looking for a variety of different organizations to come together under this project for funding. So we are looking to fund all 23 counties, Northern Arapahoe and Eastern Shoshone. The grant funding for the first year runs through from October of 2023 to August of 2024. So this is a super short initial funding cycle, which is why we are wanting that letter returned to us as quickly as possible so that we can get some of these funds out. And then there is additional funding that goes through August of 2026. So we have these multiple funding pots where we're going to use the child care funding that we talked about earlier and the ARPA funding, but they have different requirements as far as when they can be spent. And so that is what creates these requirements for all of us. We're talking about funding in the amount of $67,000, right around there, for this initial time, so that October through August. And then for the extended period of time, it's $159,000. And there is the opportunity for additional funding based on availability and responses from communities. So we want to know who is going to be requesting funding as soon as possible. I'm going to give you actual form here, and then I'm going to give you but this way this time instead of afterwards. So I'll give you this that you can pull it up if you like to. And then I also am going to put it on the screen, and we're going to go through what it's going to ask you in the letter of interest. So it'll ask you the name of your organization, where you are located. Again, that this grant funding must be in Wyoming and serve the residents of Wyoming. That we would like your name and contact information, that we would like to know who your leadership team is, who's involved in this. What communities do you provide services to? Do you provide services to multiple counties, to multiple cities? What does that look like? And are you collaborating with other local, state, national organizations? Who those are? Are you currently collecting data, and what data that is? What level of funding you're hoping to receive for this initial 9-month grant cycle? And it also gives an opportunity to say, I'm just seeking technical assistance. We've heard a lot from communities that the technical assistance is where you are most interested at this point. And it asks you what technical assistance you're most interested in as part of this funding. And then we ask you to provide an inclusion statement so that you can list for us who it is that you intend to provide services to with your organization or with the collaborative organizations that you are working with. It's a pretty quick form. If there are pieces of it that you have only partial information or that you're needing additional time to get other pieces, please let us know. And we will surely give you some grace in those pieces. Or if there is a way that you already have this information and you want to be able to either copy and paste it or send us something that you had previously completed for some other entity that you had to submit it to, please feel free to reuse those things that you already have. And if you have any questions with that form, please reach out to Amy Zeke. I want to give you an example of some of the things that are going to be occurring in the phases under the grant funding. So some of this is going to be, if you say you just want to do technical assistance, these are examples of things that are available under the technical assistance. So we've talked about the ACEs training, adverse childhood experiences training, the protective factors training, the mandatory reporting training, the national standards training from the National Family Support Network, and the parent advisory council training Those trainings are available to anybody who wants to be part of this technical assistance network, whether or not you would apply for funding. So we want to ensure that that is something that is available to everybody in Wyoming to be able to get those pieces of the training. But then we also have phases that as you are working through the different phases, you'll be able to use some funds for some staffing support, for some collaboration, for some different pieces that you maybe have been thinking about wanting to do in your community, but haven't had the funds to do so. So with that piece, and I know it's very little that we're sharing here about the grant funding piece, you'll meet with Amy Zeke to determine what phase do you feel like your community is currently in, and where do you need and want the most support based on what it is that you and your community determine. Based on that, you'll then submit a plan with what it is that you want to do as a family resource center. We've been talking a lot about what family resource centers can do as far as having one-stop shops and a hub of places. We talk a lot about taking the wheels off the family and putting the wheels on the providers. We also recognize that that is going to come at a cost. And so as you're thinking about creative ways to be able to collaborate and work together, we want to provide you the technical assistance and some funding to be able to do so. The other component of that is that we have been talking about the partnership with Wyoming 211 and their expansion into their community information exchange, and that will be a way that we can also help link those projects that are currently going on in the state. So whether you are already part of the Wyoming 211 network, or you want to be more involved with the Wyoming 211 network, we have been working very closely with the Wyoming 211 staff and program to be able to support this in a more coordinated way, so that when we're rolling out projects across the state, we're doing so in a way that doesn't make it that you have to do additional things to be part of their program and additional things to be part of our program, similar in ways that we are connecting our technical assistance and training to be able to have one place to go to that you can be trained and get the information that you need. But that a lot of what you determine that you need to start a family resource center is based on what you, as the experts in your community, are going to ask for in your grant request. And so it's hard to say what family resource centers are going to look like in Wyoming today, because we are just starting down the path of developing, enhancing what is already here. What I do know is that there's incredible work that is happening across Wyoming in every single place in Wyoming. And that the intention of this is to support and strengthen the work that you are already doing, recognizing that there are limitations to what we're able to do because we're so spread out across the state. And if we can connect to one another, whether that's virtually or putting wheels on more of us, it is a way for us to be able to meet the needs of all Wyomingites in a way that we have not collaborated before, and in a way that we can learn from those collaborations that are already strong in your communities. So that's the letter of interest. Other thing I want to make sure to say is that if you fill out a letter of interest and you change your mind tomorrow or in a few weeks or whenever that might be, there's no obligation based on you completing the letter of interest. So if you think that this is something that your community might be interested in, please feel free to fill it out, and that there is no obligation to you or your organization based on that. That obligation comes much further down the road in the signing of a contract. So up until that point, there's lots of discussion that's happening. If you fill out a letter of interest and someone else in your county or close by to you fills out a letter of interest, one of the things that we'll be working on is setting up collaborative meetings to bring everybody who submitted in those same areas together so that we can have more of a discussion about what could it look like and how much stronger could it be if we could all work together in those areas where that is occurring. So don't worry if somebody else is going to fill out one in your area as well. Our intention is to bring everybody to the table in areas together so that we can really have a strong collaboration of everybody who wants to be part of this. The other thing that I would say is that for anybody who wasn't here today or has additional questions, please send them to either myself or Amy or Nicole, and we will get those questions answered. But I did want to pause here and see if anybody had any specific questions today about the letter of interest or the process or anything else that was on your mind as we're all here today.
Sarah, I have a question, and I know this is farther down the road from the letter of interest, just around reporting requirements with this grant, as well as, I'm assuming this would be a reimbursement rather than upfront distribution, but kind of how that would be set up.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. You always ask very insightful questions. I appreciate that. So when we're talking about the data requirements, some of that is going to be built based on the data that you already collect, and some of it will be based on an evaluation that we currently have under an RFP. So as soon as we have our evaluator, which that RFP closes tomorrow, yes, tomorrow, the evaluator, we have them working on two different pieces to help us to make sure that we're implementing it in a way that we intended, and to help us determine what are those outcome measures that we can measure when we're implementing family resource centers that will help us to determine that this is something that has either worked or not worked as we're collecting that data. And those who are part of this project are going to be able to provide input on that evaluation of what is necessary and what is reasonable for collection. The other part of that is that we have an opportunity to be able to collect statewide protective factors data through the protective factors survey, and technical assistance and the support to be able to collect those pieces of data will be provided through this project so that we can start looking at collecting apples to apples when we're looking at the kinds of questions that we're asking across the state in family serving organizations. So when we're talking about those data pieces, a lot of it is going to take place with the input of those who are part of this project so that you can help to determine what it is that should be collected as the experts who are out providing the services, and also what is reasonable to request when you are having to do all of the other things that have to be done, and what kind of support can we provide in technical assistance in those areas as well, because we know that that's often a limitation.
And then I'm assuming this is a reimbursement, like monthly.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you. What I will say is that it is the best practice of how to spend money is to have it on a reimbursement base. What I will tell you is that as a community, if that is going to be a major obstacle, those are conversations to have with Amy as far as, are there ways to be able to have some of the funding to be upfront versus a reimbursement. I can tell you that there is some allowance for that on a very limited basis, and that what those requirements would be to protect whoever it is that's spending the money, and then us as having to report to our federal partners how it was spent, those mechanisms have to be put into place. And so it is more of a risk for us to do that piece of it. But it's not that it's not an option at all. So if there is a circumstance, and especially in some of our smaller areas where there may not be an option to be able to have any funds to start that first month or whatever it might look like, those conversations we want to definitely have to figure out, are there ways that we can better support how we get this funding into our counties. What else? Kyle, good to see you here this morning.
Good morning. So I see, and maybe I just missed hearing this, but it said for 9 months. So if we're starting new programs looking at sustainability of funds, especially in our smaller communities, we definitely want to get this jump started because we are noticing that we need those hubs. But just kind of what kind of plans we might have for the future to find some sustainable funding.
Yeah, great. So let me be a little bit more clear, because I think that, thank you for asking for that clarification, because I want to make sure that we all understand. So we have the funding goes through the 2026. However, we have an initial pot of funds that we have to spend by the September of 2024. And so that initial 9 months is what we have to initially spend. But then we have additional funds that go through 2026, which still leads to the same question: how do we then sustain this? And that's part of the technical assistance that we are going to be working on with every community, because we completely agree and recognize that that is something that we don't want to start a bunch of programs and then not be able to sustain it. There are some federal opportunities that we have looked at that do provide additional funding for the next phase after 2026. And some of the conversation has been, we need to get into these initial steps and see what it is that communities want to do before we go out and look at additional funding for those later years. And is this something that is going to work? And is this something that you want to do? As a community, you get to decide, are you going to opt into this network and these funds? And we want to make sure that it's something that you want to do, first of all, before we go out and ask for additional funding. But at the point where you're engaged in that technical assistance, we'll be starting those conversations and looking at what does it look like longer term after 2026. But we currently have funds through August of 2026 for grants. Saw something in the restrictions on what the funds can be spent on. So yes, in the fact that we can't spend it on things like alcohol or drugs, or but that there's a lot of flexibility in what it is that you are going to be doing in your family resource center. So there is flexibility based on your meeting the needs of your community. So if you identify a need and are saying these are the kinds of things that we want to do through the technical assistance and the application process, you'll be able to identify what kinds of things you want to spend these funds on. But it really is up to your community outside of those things that we can't spend federal funds on ever. But there's a lot of leeway in what it is that you'll be able to determine is best as a community, and where you need to expand the programs that are already in place. At Cathedral Home, for example, Max, because I know that's where you are. It's not a real clear question. There are always restrictions, but it's a very flexible funding, as long as we can tie it back to the needs that are in your community that have been identified. Thank you. What else? Okay, well, we'll give you your time back. You all have my contact information. It is on the invite for this meeting today. And we will put a copy of this recording on our website. We will send out to anybody who missed today, and please contact us with any questions. Thank you so much for being here today.